Lovely stuff. Thanks, Charlie. That's great. Yeah, afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you all. Thanks for joining. Yeah, it's great to be speaking to you all today. So I've been working here at Solent Transport for 2 years now. My background's working with sort of larger MAS companies and sort of multinational MAS projects and things around there. I've joined specifically within Solent Transport to come and deliver what has become the largest trial of mobility credits in the UK. So we're going to take you through what the scheme was and some of the core sort of learnings and stuff that we found as we move forward. So just a little bit about the Future Transport Zone if you don't know. So the Solent FTZ was a £28.8 million DFT funded programme, one of 4 in the UK. And the project itself covers the Solent region. So that's Southampton, Portsmouth, the Isle of Wight and Hampshire, which represents a population of about 1.24 million. So it's particularly large. What's quite unique about this region is that it includes like all different forms of transport needs and operations, and we include ferries across the water crossings. So most transport forms are represented within the area, which is great test bed to use all these information. There's loads of information available on the website that encourages you to go and look at the FTZ piece. What we're going to talk about today is mobility credits. The only thing I do want to point out for this is that the mobility credits scheme was delivered through Breeze. You'll hear me talking about Breeze a lot throughout this. That was our mobility as a service app, which I'll come on to later, but that was fundamental to the delivery of it as we move forward. So that's the FTZ in a nutshell. So important to sort of set the context really, I guess, to make sure that we're all fully aware what mobility credits are. So mobility credits themselves, they aim to deliver travel behaviour change and enhance quality of life through their delivery. And typically they are financial incentives or digital tokens that can be part of a city or a corporation or a national government scheme. They will either have a real financial value, so they're either £100 worth of credits that you can spend as normal, or quite often they will act as discounts on eligible travel services. So it could be a free trial period, could be a percentage off an amount of transport that you get and move forward. So that's typically what they look like. Depending on the audience you work with, sometimes they are delivered in exchange for a trade-off. So it could be that credits are offered in exchange of scrapping an old polluting car through a vehicle scrappage scheme. It could be that it's about reducing car usage or like giving up a parking permit, or quite often just committing to a sustainable travel behaviour, which often can be tracked through another app or a different device. So you get credits in exchange for changing your behaviour in a positive way. So that's the sort of core concept. There's loads of different ways of delivering mobility credits. You can deliver them through a mobility as a service app. So you pay for your travel using the credits, or in some forms, the app or the mobility as a service tool will generate a QR code that you can use to access and scan across barriers and ticket reception machines, etc. So that's one way of delivering it. You could look to do a card-based system. So this could be a prepaid card or a smart card. So Transport for the West Midlands, their car swap scheme that they did in Coventry was delivered through a prepaid card, so a card that can be used in a normal way that's loaded up with credit, or like an Oyster system like we have in London, where credit is added to that access card that you've got, or Swift card, etc. around there. So it could be card based. You could offer a voucher based approach, and these are either digital or printed. Typically printed are for like non-smartphone users to make sure that we've got equity of access, etc. into those sorts of schemes. Could be passes that are provided, or like rideshare discounts that are offered through a voucher code or a physical voucher that gets issued and used. So that's another way of doing it, typically seen more so on the sort of trade-off models. There's reimbursement, buy your transport and then receive the money back almost as a refund, or sometimes like auto deduct from preloaded accounts that you might have through systems. So you may have a credit amount that you claim off and then claim comes back as a refund service after you've purchased it. So that's a different way of doing it. There are subscription models. Now we see these more across sort of like Europe, different countries around there, where like free or discounted shared mobility access is provided, or like bundled packages. So it could be that you pay a fee per month and you get unlimited transport for that week, and you can use all public service systems within there. So some really good examples, particularly in sort of Central Europe, that you can look around there. There's behaviour rewards. So this is similar to the trade-off piece, so where you reward sustainable choices, or you provide credits based on like milestones being reached. So it could be that a participant doesn't use their car for 50 different types of journeys and then receives some mobility credit. And these are quite common in the US, examples of what they're doing over in that area. And then finally, there's partnership-based models. These models are more like community-based distribution. So it could be that a school or a charity is issuing mobility credits on your behalf, or you're partnering workplaces to do payroll deduction schemes. So you allow for the transport to be used and it's come off a wage packet. There's like a subscription model built within it. The advantage of partnership models is that they allow you to go beyond just a local transport system. Typically, they can be applied more at a regional or a national level area as they move forward. So that's sort of mobility credits in a nutshell, all the different ways that what it's trying to achieve and the different ways that we could administer it if we wanted to. In terms of the scheme that we've delivered, we had a dedicated delivery model that we spoke through and have looked at, which was voucher codes being added exclusively to the Breeze app. And the Breeze app provided a one-stop access to journey planning, ticketing and travel information all in one place. And uniquely, this is the only known example in the UK in particular where it's been delivered exclusively through a MAS app. So it was a requirement to participate in our trials. But that one-stop access has provided really good opportunities for our participants to understand the wider impacts. So this was our constant delivery model that we chose to do. What we did do is we've changed 3 elements across all our different trial groups that we've worked with to try to understand the impact and understand the general outcomes across the different trial groups. So in particular, we've looked at different financial values and frequencies. So the different values for mobility credit range from like 20 to 50 pounds, depending on which audience we were working with, so different amounts of credit were offered. And then we also tried doing different frequencies, and that was either a per month or like an upfront cost, so that you could better understand the spending patterns that people were using. So were they like using all their money at the start, were they hoarding it, or was a gradual feed of credit moving forward? So we tried that as a group. The other aspects we looked at were different audiences. So initially we worked with just one audience, but there was a little bit of underspend within that group, which I'll sort of touch on to, and that gave us the opportunity to work with lots of different demographics, different age groups, different income backgrounds to understand the impact of mobility credits around there. And then the final one was different trial lengths. So we have tested out how long mobility credit needs to be delivered before you can see the impacts that you've got. So should it be a 12-month scheme? We ran some schemes at 4 months. And all the trials we ran were determined by different resourcing and different sort of survey completions. Our longer trials typically had points where you had to complete the survey in order to continue with participation. So one of our 12-month surveys, you did 6 months. If you did the midpoint survey, you could then continue for the final 6 months. And it was a good way of making sure we had lots of data and things involved. So that's how we designed our schemes. If we look at actually some of the trials that we've got, and I'm going to talk you through very high level what our trials were, and then we'll dive into the case studies of some of them to understand what impacts we've had, and then touch on at the end how we think you can have the biggest impact on people looking at those different areas. So in particular, all of the trials that we have run include the ability for multiple travellers to use the mobility credit. So provided the participant was going on that route. So if the participant was travelling with their children, they could buy tickets for their children using this mobility credit as long as they were making that journey at the same time, which was fine. So in late 2023, but over 2024 period, we launched 2 major trials. The first one was our council tax support trial. This was our biggest group, 760 participants across the Solent region. This was recruited by speaking to our local authority partners. We went out, got some information, and they sent letters out saying to people who are on the register for the council tax support, say there is this new scheme that you can join up, this new opportunity. Out of all those letters that went out, 30% applied, 88% of which were eligible. So we allowed one household and certain age groups. 93% of those added a voucher, and then from there 20% spent the full amount every month. So it's quite lower spending rates than we were expecting, and I'll dive into that in some of the results as we move forward. So that was our sort of largest trial. During 2024, we were also approached by Havant Youth Hub, so a group that's offering support to those not in education or employment or training, so NEETs, to be able to access mobility credit. Now, they had some funding that they wanted to use to put forward, so we offered vouchers that could be used through the Breeze app to the Havant Youth Hub, which they gave to their young people to get to sort of job interviews or training opportunities. And that was a really interesting model for us to understand the commercial systems of how external people might want to use mobility credit. If we've got a solution that can offer it, how can other areas of local authorities access the same system in a different way using different funding pots? So that's quite interesting. Quite a small scale trial though. And then, as I mentioned, we had a little bit of underspend. So we had the opportunity to launch additional trials in 2025. In particular, we launched sort of 3 major ones. So it was the active Pompey neighbourhood, which is like an area of streets that have got positive active travel interventions and information. There are major infrastructure projects in Portswood, which is an area in Southampton, a bus gate being implemented in an active travel zone. So targeted intervention with those people affected by that structure. And then the Walsall Travel Hub, so people who live within a geographic location to the travel hub itself to see if they would access it more. But those top 3 are all associated with supporting infrastructure or behaviour change projects in the local area within the Solent. And we were trying to understand if using credit would help improve the outcomes of those projects, lessen some of the negative impacts associated with projects like that, or to seeing if things like mobility hubs were used more often, if their use was incentivised as they move forward. And then we did employment support as well. So this was working with Southampton City Council Employment Support Team, external partner, who delivered and issued vouchers to participants. And we worked with different age brackets here, so 16 to 24 and 50 plus, lots of different audiences there. So that was great, and that was useful for us to understand that impact. Because we've worked with a low income group, the final group that we've tried to work with are food banks. Now, these are what we've called our like self-selecting audience. So we didn't actively target within these organisations. We just did marketing campaigns inside. The food bank user would go in, see advertisements for mobility credits, and then could self-select that they wanted transport support, and then could sign up for the scheme. So that was like a trial to understand how best to recruit participants and how best they interacted with it. But again, working with a low-income group to see if it was the same sort of findings in the tax support group as we come forward. So that's like a whistle-stop tour of all the stuff we've done for the last 2 years. What I want to do now is dive into the different examples of the projects we've got and say what impact have they had, and then I'll sort of summarise that towards the end so you understand those. So if we dive into some of these, this is our first one, council tax support. So for this scheme, we offered £50 every month to participants for 12 months, so £600 worth of credit in total, 760 people, and it was 18 to 30 was the age bracket. We chose that age bracket because we had to limit the number of applicants we had based on the funding that we were had available for the project, but also because it was being delivered through a MAS app, we wanted to work with an audience who had a high propensity to use technology, which typically that sort of younger demographic. So what did we learn? The main thing we learned was that there was a significant underspend, and typically only 60% of the total voucher value was spent for the per participant over the limited aspects of the project. So there was underspend that we weren't expecting. We think that is attributable to the limited ability to replicate real world behaviour that we had through the Breeze app. So one of the limitations, unfortunately, we had was that not all tickets were available inside the app itself, particularly the lower cost ones. So the sort of £2, then £3 single tickets, some child tickets were not available. Typically, it's the slightly more expensive carnet tickets. The feedback we've had is that people would keep hold of their credit and wait to use it unless they really needed to use it for other purchases and stuff. They didn't want to waste money on a weekly ticket for only 1 or 2 journeys, so they were trying to be a bit more strategic with their use. I mean, the spend stuff generally is interesting. The chart here just shows the spend for that council tax support, how it was split over the year. Overwhelmingly 80% was spent on bus, 14% on rail, and much smaller percentages for micromobility and ferry and hover, as you'd expect. But broadly, these percentages were seen the same across all trial groups, some minor variations between bus and rail, but typically the percentages for the other lots are typically low. So it's safe to say that for mobility credits, if you target that, certainly in our region, this is typically how the spend will be. So the bus sector in particular really does benefit. So the other aspect was we found was actually there was a very limited impact on the use of public transport. It didn't have a huge impact over there. But I think this is because overall this group was already quite a low car ownership group. This slide sort of shows the demographics that we had of those 760 participants, and you can see that 84% didn't have access to a car or van. So they were already actively using public transport. So we weren't expecting to see a particularly massive increase around this area. You can also see some of the other sort of demographics about employment rates and those are the physical and mental health condition that they declared at the start. So quite an interesting audience, and it was also nearly 90% female as well. So not a huge impact on public transport, but overwhelmingly what we did find is that working with this target audience is that you see a massive improvement in their overall well-being and quality of life. So 97% of the surveyed participants at the 14-month point have identified that they've seen a massive increase in their overall well-being, and half throughout the project life cycle have said it's helped them find or stay in employment. So it's had a positive impact. The qualitative data we've had back has explained how people have managed to take their families out on trips that they wouldn't otherwise do. And for those that do have a physical or mental health condition, have found that having mobility credit gave them the confidence they needed to go and try new routes or understand new plans or just get out that little bit more often, and generally have a much wider impact on their ability to travel and their access to mobility services moving forward. So really, really positive quality of life outcomes from this trial group. If we look at employment support, so this was a different type of trial. So this was single-use vouchers of either 20, 30 or £50. We provided 405 vouchers to Southampton City Council. They actually split them into different target groups, 16 to 24, 25, 49 and 50 plus. And it was a really, really interesting group. This allowed us as an organisation to work with an external partner who took on the responsibility of issuing and administering mobility credit vouchers. So they did all the work for us, and they were sat with the participant who was going to take part, was going to receive a voucher, to identify whether they needed a voucher, what value they needed it for, and how they were going to use it. It allowed us to track that as we move forward, which was really, really positive. An interesting group, low car ownership, low amount of people travelling for childcare reasons, which was different to the council tax support group. But typically 35% thought that public transport was quite poor value for money, and we saw some positive outcomes towards the end of this. A limitation of working in this methodology is that we were able to do surveys with these participants up front, because they had to do the survey with the person before they could receive the voucher. What we have struggled to do is to get those people to then complete surveys at the other end to understand the wider outcomes and impacts. But if we cross-compare some of the research we've done, the council tax support trial, when we asked about access to employment, a very high percentage, 62%, said that they attached a level of importance to mobility credits as a positively influencer in doing a change in their employment status. So whether that helped them maintain a job, or whether that helped them have some sort of more access to employment or wider opportunities, or could do more shifts, a very high percentage said mobility credits was a very good positive influencer in helping that move forward. So there's definitely some big impact potential around employment support, probably best though targeted with a specific group that we've got here. Youth support then, so quite similar. This was the not in education, employment or training group. This is quite a low trial, so statistically this is not a significant trial. There isn't a huge amount of data we've got around here, but what it has done is it's allowed us to work with a younger audience who maybe wouldn't be able to access mobility credits through some of the other sort of financially regulated systems that we've got. The Breeze system was available for them. So these were £20 single-use voucher. We had around 50 participants for this one. Working with this group, they had a high desire to use public transport in order to access training or education opportunities, but the main two factors were cost and lack of knowledge. Now, we managed to get rid of the cost barrier by providing a dedicated voucher that could only be used for public transport. And then the lack of knowledge was the other piece. And this is the significant findings through this group, is that actually having a Breeze app, a MAS app that people could do their journey planning and stuff in at the same time was really useful. So it did allow us to work with that younger audience. Those that were surveyed, 66% said that they would continue to use a MAS app, and they hadn't thought about using one before. They weren't really aware of what that system was, etc. So it's encouraged them to do more journey planning and understand the public transport system at a younger age. An early intervention that's been quite positive. And 100% of them said that they understood the convenience of public transport more. We tackled the knowledge barrier because they had to do their own journey planning and work out how they were going to get there, and they were given the tools and the financial incentive they needed to do that journey. And hopefully that's put in some positive behaviour changes for these younger people that they'll take forward in their future lives. So we've got the general population group. So this was what I refer to as a general population group. So this was like those top three ones that I spoke about, the infrastructure projects. They really valued the trial, this group. It was slightly different, this one. We we gave them £200 up front as opposed to a regular amount each month for 4 months. And we had 440 participants, and there was no age limit to this one. So the oldest participant we had was actually 78, who was using the app and understanding how that was moving forward. What was interesting about this one is how they used the credit. So 32% of the group spent the full amount, so they spent their full £200, but the most of the activity happened in the final few days of the 4-month trial, which indicates a sort of use it or lose it mentality as we move forward. So this chart shows the number of vouchers that were purchased, the number of purchases that were made by a voucher each day, and you can see this massive jump in the last few days of the trial, so 243% increase, which is massive, and that coincides with us sending out emails and texts saying, don't forget that your trial credit is about to expire and it's going to be taken away. So people then stockpiled, purchased tickets that they needed to use or wanted to use moving forward. So they probably didn't value the scheme just as much because they sort of needed constant reminders to do it as they went through. Early analysis of this suggests that there has actually been a very positive impact on public transport use and perception. Important to note that 65% of this audience actually had access to a car and regularly used their car. Overwhelmingly, we've seen the comments say that participants are now more aware of public transport routes in their local area. Their trial encouraged them to use new routes, particularly those that were most engaged. So we are expecting to see a minor increase in bus and train use in particular as we move forward, and further surveys that we have planned will help us understand that in a little bit more detail as those trials have sort of slowly come to an end, so to look at the longer term outcomes. And then the final group I just want to talk through is our food bank group. So this was a group that we just did a general marketing campaign from. You can see a flyer example on the left-hand side. So these were left in food banks, and the food bank sort of volunteers also identified people who could sign up for this. We had 94 participants, anywhere from 18 and above. This group had a much higher voucher utilisation, so about 33% typically spent the full amount, and just over half of them used the voucher quite steadily. It was either like high usage at the start or steady use throughout the end, and for them to sort of manage that budget as they were moving forward. 36% of them said that they did expect to see their use of public transport increase across bus and train systems as we move forward. So very limited impact on micromobility in other forms, but bus and train overwhelmingly get positively affected by mobility credit through the trials we run in Solent. So now, interesting though, for this group, they were asked like what benefits did they perceive that they had from the trial and their feedback, and the majority said that obviously yes, the reduced cost spending was there, but actually the highest benefit that they received was the increased ability to plan journeys in advance, and they've understood the importance of doing that to make sure you're getting the best value for money, that you're taking the best route, and actually that little bit of research can help people understand their budgets a bit more for transport that they're going to be using. So certainly a bit of education piece, and that then has positively led to people wanting to use public transport more often as they're more aware of the convenience of it within the certain areas that they live moving forward. So that's like 2 years worth of trials condensed down to sort of 20 minutes. I wanted to come back to that question that we asked at the start. So where do mobility credits have the biggest impact? In reality, they have impact everywhere. It's the type of format that we offer mobility credits in, and we offer the audience you're working with will affect the audience you've got. So looking at all the trials we've done, these are my sort of 4 core things that I would say can help have certain impacts based on how you should deliver them. So if you want to increase public transport use within a local area, there's sort of 2 core trial groups that we've experienced that you can work with. If you work with target a high car ownership group, it is best to give them a regular credit amount on a monthly basis to prevent stockpiling of tickets at the end, and to keep people engaged in the scheme, to keep them actively using public transport so that they're more understanding of the system and can start to embed some of those behaviours. The other alternative is to work with a lower income group but with a larger upfront amount, and that typically is because if participants want to experience things like train, which is typically more expensive for longer distance journeys, they need more credit up front, and that can embed some longer term behaviours into sort of train and bus usage as they move forward. So if I was going to increase public transport, my advice to you would be look at those 2 audiences. If you've got a local objective of understanding quality of life, the council tax support trial is like a great case study to prove how that works. target a low-income group with a regular amount of credit that keeps them engaged for a long period of time, that can have a longer impact on their ability to access social services, healthcare, employment, education, training, all that sort of good stuff that generally increases people's quality of life outcomes. If you want to increase people's understanding of public transport and the routes, I mean, that's a benefit we see across, but if that was a targeted ambition, then actually targeting younger people with a single-use voucher when required, so don't just give them one voucher, give them a voucher at multiple occasions when they need it, will make them more aware of public transport that they can use and access and move forward. So some really positive findings we found working with the Youth Hub around there. And finally, increased employment. So if you do want to increase employment through mobility credits, the best thing to do is to use single-use vouchers, but use a specialist delivery aid partner. Ultimately, these organisations are doing that work already. Mobility credits is a facilitator to take away the barrier of cost of accessing these education. They are the best people to make sure that the right voucher is going to the right person for the right amount of time. And so offering that system and solution through a partner who does that as their sort of core business is the best way of doing success. And so for me, they're the core sorts of ways to target people. The other success of this trial was the fact that the participants had the ability to plan their journeys in the same location that they were buying their tickets, that education piece, that overcoming new routes, etc. Everything was there for them to understand. And that's also been a success factor. We are now in the process of building on these lessons here about how we can have the most impact and understanding the journey planning piece to trial, hopefully in the next few months, a prepaid card scheme, working with some of these audiences to see if we see the same benefits, the same outcomes using a prepaid card as you would do something that's delivered through a MAS app, which will hopefully allow people to replicate real world behaviour. So thank you ever so much. That is, like I said, 2 years worth of work for condensed down to 25 minutes. So hopefully it's been useful, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have. So.
Thank you, Luke. There's a question in the Q&A from Linda, and I've got a question myself that I wanted to ask. We'll start with Linda's. How did you go about choosing the types of groups that you targeted during the project? So in the case studies that you had there, you talked about food banks, you talked about Youth Hub, and the initial one you talked about was the council tax support band. What drove the decision to target those particular groups?
So I'll just come off mute there. Yeah, the initial group we worked with was targeted in collaboration with our local authority partners, the council tax support audience, to understand the numbers of people, and also the age under 30 was to make sure that they had a high propensity to use technology, so usual phone high users around there. So that helped us come up with a number that we thought we could fund and support. The other trials were more led by our participants that we were working with, the project partners that we were working with. So there was sort of no limitations with the infrastructure projects. We purposely wanted to do general sort of groups there in a general population. Working with food banks was typically a sort of higher parent group. It just was the natural group that sort of came forward around there. And then the employment hub was targeted ages of those different groups. So we purposely picked projects that gave us a very broad range of ages, backgrounds, understandings, access to public transport, etc., and to make sure that that was covered. And that's helped us give us a really broad understanding of where the impact is most beneficial to different audiences. So.
Thanks, Luke. We're getting a few more Q&A questions that are popping up now. I've also allowed everybody's microphones to be activated, so if you'd rather ask your question to Luke directly than put it in the Q&A, then please raise your hand and I'll come to you as we move through. Next question's from Robin Tyne, who says, thank you for the really interesting presentation. Given that this was a trial, does Solent Transport have any plans to make the scheme permanent? And did you find existing concessions, i.e. free bus travel for those over state pension age, had any impact on the usage of mobility credits? So two-header.
Yeah, cool. That's a great question, Robin. Thank you. Yes, I'll take the second one first. The sort of older groups that maybe have got bus passes, or disability groups that have got passes, etc. Yes, we did see affected mobility credit use, but the majority of the use was on how the credit was spent on the different mode of transport. So certainly those slightly older participants, certainly through the general trial scheme, typically were using train more often, because they weren't receiving the same sort of discount, sort of state discounts, etc., around that travel. So it was actively encouraging to use other forms of transport that maybe they wouldn't otherwise access. And we did find again that they were, because they were planning journeys to see what they could spend their vouchers on, they were able to plan different routes, and they were also buying tickets that maybe they otherwise wouldn't purchase. So if you've got someone who's on a bus pass, and they've got people, friends, family, etc., they were travelling with, the trial terms and conditions did allow you to travel with other people, provided the participant was going through, so they could purchase tickets for other people around there as well. So yeah, that was the main impact. We just saw that the voucher was used in a different way. Spend was a little bit lower because obviously they're not using it as actively as they were, but it's the way they spent the credit was done slightly differently. And sorry, Charlie, I only wrote down the word trial for the first part of that question. So if you could say that bit again, I'll answer that one.
Yeah, so the first part of Robin's question was, given this was a trial, do Solent Transport have any plans to make the scheme permanent?
Yeah, so we have done some, and are going through some commercial analysis at the moment to say how can you make mobility credits sort of self-funding or sustainable or wash its face. At the moment, it's very much grant-led. We've had a large injection of cash from FTZ to be able to deliver these mobility credits. There are examples across other areas of the UK where local authorities are using sort of Section 106 money, or they're using planning consultation money, etc., to be able to deliver schemes moving forward. There's one that we're aware of in the Solent region that we're actively in conversations with to look at how we could deliver that through a prepaid card. And that, again, is why we want to understand whether the same benefits will be done for a prepaid card. Mobility credits, as we've delivered it, are an expensive way of delivering it, because you are also paying for an expensive MAS app to be able to deliver all this functionality. Obviously, it's not the sole function of that MAS app as it's moving forward, but you've got mobility credits being delivered through there. So for us to be able to understand the longer term impact, longer term viability of this, that's why we want to push with a different delivery model, to see if we can reduce almost the cost of sales, to see if we can move forward with mobility credits as a longer term impact moving forward. But certainly that's, the wider research we want to understand is, where are other pots of funding that are available to keep mobility credits moving forward that can have a genuine positive impact and move forward.
Thanks, Luke. Next question comes from Mark Welch. Will there be a publication by Solent Transport or with the Department for Transport that details the findings presented today? It's been a very helpful resource to reference for other local transport authorities about the potential outcomes for future credits, scheme designs and cases, etc.
Yeah, cool. That's great. Yeah, thanks, Mark, for the question. Glad it's been useful. So we have submitted a final report, as of all of Solent Future Transport projects. They've submitted a final report to the Department for Transport, which is going through their review and their understanding, for them to understand. It's very detailed, dives into the data behind all this stuff that I presented, certainly for the council tax support trial, which was the main trial we've launched. We are in the process of creating shorter, snappier reports for all the other trial case studies that I spoke through that will go through the methodology. So I'd encourage you to keep an eye on the Solent Transport website, where all of this sort of information will get uploaded as our sort of major program comes to an end. You can see reference on the slide to sort of project toolkits and stuff. So there'll be lots of case studies and lots of information that is uploaded as part of our dissemination activity. And of course, you can always reach out to me directly to have a chat about anything that you want to talk through in more detail. So.
Yeah, but I'll put your email in the Q&A if that's all right, Luke, for people to get in touch with you directly. Another question that I had was about local authorities who are perhaps thinking about a mobility credits trial and are maybe not sure which group to start with. Was there an easier target group to set up a mobility credits trial for out of the case studies that you've outlined for us today?
Yeah, that's a great question. The recruitment process has been different for most of our trials. There's been some commonality. So to dive into the council tax support group, who is our easiest recruitment target, if you want to quickly launch a trial with a known audience and be able to get access to them quite quickly and easily, working with a partner to achieve that is the best way to do it. So as I mentioned, the council tax support group, we sent out, or asked our partner authorities to send out a letter explaining the trial, got them to apply through an application form, and it was already a known targeted list. It's over 2,700 people, 30% of which applied. It was a very quick, easy control process, and you're offering support directly to people who it's going to benefit. Conversely, the food bank trial, where we were probably expecting a higher proportion of people to get involved in the scheme, because again, it was a low income group. We're offering £200 of travel credit for 4 months, which is for only applying for an application form, which is a great benefit. The actual sign up rates are really quite low from what we were expecting. I think we were hoping to get about 200. We had about 90 or so actually apply for the scheme within the food bank settings. So that was more difficult working with a group where you're doing sort of physical marketing and activity, probably because people don't understand it. There's probably an aspect of like it feeling a little bit too good to be true, and we probably haven't really explored that in enough detail. But people get these letters saying, especially for the council tax support trial, you can have £600 of mobility credit for 12 months, and sometimes there is that element of is this too good to be true? What's the catch here? Type stuff. We did put a lot of effort and time into making sure frequently asked questions and stuff covered those sorts of issues and why we were doing it. And again, we saw similar sort of conversion rates for the public general sector stuff. So I would say if you want to ensure a high level of engagement and a high level of people signing up, a low income audience group is best to work with, ideally through a partner if you can, because there's that sort of trust in the brand that you're working with. So working with sort of low income groups is good. But certainly there's more work to be done around the sort of wider marketing, self-selecting or self-enrolling type systems as well, to understand how they can best work and how best be engaged with. So.
Thanks, Luke. There's no other questions in the Q&A section. Is there anybody else on the call who wanted to ask their question in person rather than type anything in? You can raise your hand if you do. Otherwise, we may be coming to the end. Guy Dorrell.
Oh, hi there. Yeah, I just put my question in the chat, but not quickly enough, obviously. I was just curious if 36% of the food bank group said their public transport use would increase, what did the other 64% say? And did they give any reasons if they said no or don't know, or were there any other options? I'd just be curious, because that's sort of a third of people. You would expect that number to be higher.
Yeah, great question, Guy. Thanks. So there were sort of three core options we were trying to understand through those questions that we asked, is to say, would public transport, compared to the prior to the trial, would their public transport usage drop? Would it stay the same, or would it increase? So you had a sort of third increase. Probably the larger proportion was based around it staying the same, bearing in mind that group already had low car ownership, so were probably heavy users of public transport anyway for what it was they were doing, or walking or cycling. So we were seeing an increase around there. There was a small percentage, and I don't want to misquote the percentage here, but it'll certainly be in the reports that we publish, that said that their public transport usage would drop, but we think that was a misinterpretation of the question, and they have taken it compared to when they were doing the trial. So as opposed to, so they're probably dropping their transport usage. Now we've taken the financial benefit away, so they're now expecting to say, well, I can't afford it, so I won't be using it as much. But 36% have said that actually, based on what they did prior to the trial, they've been more engaged and moved forward. So large portion staying the same, not a huge amount of impact, probably different routes being used, maybe different modes of transport changing slightly. And a third, also just over a third, saying that yes, actually they think actively they'll be using transport more often. So does that answer that question? Is that enough detail?
That does, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Luke. Another question in from Kimberly. Again, thank you for the presentation. Incredibly interesting to see the differences between the different pilots. As well as helping individuals, do you think the schemes and the insight from the monitoring has helped improve services and infrastructure?
Yeah, great. Another great question. So I think, so from the participants' perspective, it's helped them understand everything else. The bit of work we haven't done yet, and it's a very valid point, is to overly share this sort of information with operators. We're going through that sort of dissemination process now, is for them to understand actually the different services and solutions that are out there and what's available. It certainly raised questions for us around if we were to do things like this, could we have a better collaboration with operators to maybe look at mobility credit specific tickets that could be added through the system or added onto their bus network? So more of an authority sort of led, this is what we want to achieve. Maybe the ticket selection we've got at the moment isn't suitable. Could we work in collaboration with that to move forward? Certainly, it's given us a large data bank that can feed into transport strategy to understand actually how people want and need to interact with public transport and how we can best have those outcomes. So I think really for us, that is that next step. And particularly with changes in local government coming forward, mayoral combined authorities, etc., it's a core ambition of us to make sure that the lessons learned from this are really understood. And then when we have greater powers and greater input over local transport, that actually we can start to influence some of those discussions around transport need and demand and balance that against maybe groups that aren't actually using public transport in the best way, and to understand why. So.
Guy.
Sorry, got another quick one we've been wrestling with in Brighton and Hove, and I just wondered if the your bus provider was able through the app to offer any further insights on the type of travel being taken, like sort of journey distance or time of day, or did you feel that was either not particularly useful information or straying into sort of questionable GDPR type territory? Did you think about whether there was kind of additional data that could be provided, or did you request it? We're just sort of really curious as to whether other operators are better set up to provide data than the ones we have in our city.
Yeah, great. So through the Breeze app, we were able to understand what types of tickets people were purchasing, whether it was single, multiple carnets, etc., time of day they were using them. Mm-hmm. Through Breeze, we were also able to understand when they activated them. There was a limitation through the system that we've got, which is obviously data that is held at the operator end of, for example, if someone used mobility credit to purchase a monthly ticket, we could see the ticket had been activated, but we didn't have active data on how many times that ticket was used. So we don't know if it was a really efficient monthly ticket that was used every day, or if it was used just once or twice. Right. That is a limitation of the data findings. Yeah. Certainly that sort of data does unfortunately sit much further at the operator end. It's certainly a finding that we wanted to understand, and we started to dive into a bit more detail. And some of the questions that we asked in the surveys were asking more about sort of journey frequency and travel and the reasons for travel. We started diving that into the qualitative in terms of like physical data. No, that is a limitation, unfortunately, with us. But again, looking at longer term mobility credit, how we engage better with operators to understand how we can get that secondary level of data, which I think really would be valuable. We have explored our research on what impact do mobility credits have, which audiences should we target with, looking at like the efficiency of the use of public transport tickets that are purchased with mobility credit, something that we haven't explored within this trial. We know it's a good concept, mobility credits. We now need to probably go into that next level of detail, so which is really interesting.
That's great, thank you.
And nice to hear from you as well. I'm a shore and by sea lad, so I'm not down the road from Brighton, so it's nice to see some local people. So.
Yeah.
Thanks, Guy. Thanks, Luke. Yeah, we're not in a rush. We do have until 1:30. If people have got specific questions based on the challenges that they're experiencing in their areas, whether it's about getting buy-in from senior management for mobility credits, potential funding sources, Luke mentioned about external funding that could be sought from youth hubs, please do ask those kind of more specific questions, and we'll try and unpick them if we can.